Welcome gamers, it is I, Swiggity Stag. I've just beat Halo Infinite on Legendary, and now that my official gamer license has been renewed, I feel like I can finally review Halo Infinite single player, the Halo game that I have been waiting for since 2010. No major spoilers here, but if you want a blind playthrough, leave. A little bit of backstory on where I fit in the Halo fanbase. Usually I wouldn't feel the need to qualify myself to review a video game, but seeing as Halo is over 20 years old and I was an infant during Combat Evolved's release, and I'm going to be talking a lot about how the old Halos were, I do feel inclined a little bit to talk about where I stand on the franchise. When I was around 5 in about 2006, my older brother took me to his friend's house, as my mom had forced him to. And seeing as he wanted to hang out with his friend without having to worry about the toddler he was saddled with, he sat me down in front of his friend's original Xbox and queued me up for some multiplayer Halo 2. And that's where it all began. I loved it thoroughly. Up to this point, I had only played on my grandpa's Atari 2600, and the graphics and gameplay of the 3D environment that Halo 2 offered gave me a high that I've been chasing through video games ever since. Ever since then, Halo has always remained at the top of my list of favorite franchises, mostly. When I was a lad, I beat Halo 3, ODST, Reach, and 4 on Legendary. Halo 4 wasn't a game I liked. One of the main issues I had was the art style, the new direction that 343 wanted to take the story with Master Chief being a lot more talkative, and the Forerunners being an active part of the galaxy instead of a mysterious alien race, seen only through what was left behind. Halo 4's story just didn't interest me. Not only did I not like the direction of the Forerunners, or Chief's new talkative self, but it also just never really engaged with me. And armor abilities and loadouts also made the multiplayer feel way less unique and less Halo than even Reach, which was a departure that I accepted, but still felt Halo enough to not feel as though they'd completely uprooted me. I still view it as my least favorite Halo, and from there I had almost entirely lost interest in Halo. I never played Halo 5. Not only did it stray even further from what feels like Halo to me, but at this point I started believing that 343 wanted to make an entirely different sci-fi franchise that slapped the brand on it for marketability. Once Halo 5 was announced and I saw what it was, I sold my Xbox One, and I bought a PS4 to play God of War and Spider-Man, games I was truly interested in playing, as Halo had officially lost its spark as the system seller it was for me. But then, in the year of our Lord, 2018, Infinite was revealed, and with the return to a Halo ring in the old art style, I was finally interested in a Halo game again. And later when it was announced that I didn't have to buy a fucking bottom shelf console for it, and I could play it on the gift that is a gaming PC, I was finally excited about a Halo game. So here we are. Halo Infinite has been out fully for just over a week, and I have finally finished my Legendary campaign playthrough, and I'm here to tell you what I think. I won't be touching on the multiplayer. These two experiences, while sharing gameplay mechanics, are two completely different experiences, and multiplayer has some serious problems that do not detract from the campaign experience. On top of that, the campaign is paid for and the multiplayer is free, so you can just try that at your leisure. You don't need me to review that. I will be rating this game as a campaign fully, because that's what you pay for. And also, I don't do partial ratings. Whole numbers only, baby. So here we are. Halo Infinite's campaign is precisely what I've always wanted from a modern Halo game. It looks and it feels and it exudes Halo in all aspects. Graphically and artistically, it's what Halo 2 looked like to me when I was a kid, and mechanically it feels like they have just upgraded Halo in a way that is exactly identical while being entirely improved. It's what I've always wanted. The combat loop is probably the best that it's been since Halo 2, and the addition of brutes and elites finally being enemies at the same time consistently gives them both time to breathe and really accentuate their differences. In Halo Combat Evolved in 2, elites were the leader class, and in 3 and ODST, the brutes took on the role, as the plot demanded it. And while brutes did not simply fight in the same way, they were the leader class in the combat loop. Also, brutes just weren't very interesting foes in Halo 3. In Halo 2, you spent the entire game as John Halo fighting elites up until the point in the story where the Great Schism occurs, and they were swapped out for brutes. They fought entirely differently. While elites were nimble and smart, using cover and seeking it when their shields were broken, as well as using their grunts and jackals to attack from the front while they supported from behind and in some cases flanking, the brutes were really aggressive and would often be found in larger groups, constantly bearing down on you and throwing an ungodly amount of nades, applying your pressures. And when they were the last brute, they would be thrown into a frenzy and run straight at you on all fours in their infamous rage and kill you with their bare hands quickly. In Halo 3, they were dumbed down significantly, content with shooting you from a distance, and their rage mode was significantly nerfed to being the point of a free kill, even on Legendary. In Infinite, they share the leader role with some interesting changes. Elites and Brutes keep their differences, but them both being available to fight in the same battle shows their differences during gameplay. Brutes will often be amongst the lower classes in the front, Jackals, Skirmishers, and Grunts, and are usually fairly squishy, but they are aggressive and very hard-hitting, while Elites are still nimble and dodgy, while being a little bit tankier because of their energy shielding, and will make an effort to flank you as their simpler comrades take the brunt of your assault. Having the front line be both made up of the simple enemies and one of the leader class makes combat much more engaging and difficult, especially as the second leader class is actively trying to flank you or snipe from a distance to support their comrades. This is a benefit that the new enemy faction, the Banished, bring to the table. The Banished are the best idea that 343 had for this game, in my opinion. My foreknowledge of who the Banished were from Halo Wars 2 made me excited for this change from the get-go, but to see such a perfect execution was mwah, chef's kiss. The Banished aren't the Covenant. They are a warband of mercenaries and Covenant outcasts led by a brute named Atriox, and as you find out soon into the story, now Escharum. This allows them to play differently from previous Halos, and lets Halo Infinite be thematically separate from the original trilogy, while we're using the same aliens. Their architecture is entirely different from that of the Covenant. While the Covenant had blues, purples, and smooth lines to show their technological superiority over the humans, greys, and greens on square ships, it also gave a sense of religious beauty to every Covenant ship and weapon. Covenant ship interiors looked like alien churches. Meanwhile, the Banished are brutalist and utilitarian, their technological superiority shown through just their technology being where it is needed. The interior of their ships and bases are dark and foreboding, while not wasting space or time on accents and flair. Their ships are far from beautiful. They are essentially hammers with engines. Here comes the first complaint. The only thematic gripe I have with the Banished is the reuse of Covenant assets. When I say that, I don't mean that 343 ripped old content and reused it lazily. I mean that a lot of the Banished look exactly as they did when they were the Covenant. Now, from a certain perspective, this makes sense. The Banished are scavengers, and they don't have any sort of the religious fervor that forced the Covenant to only use the weapons created and blessed by their holy prophets. They use what's useful. This is why you'll often see Banished using UNSC assets to their advantage, in particular Spankers, Hydras, and Shotguns. And I do like and respect the lore and consistency of that, but the main colors of the Banished are red, orange, and gold, and in spite of this, most of the low-level Brutes and Elites in particular are in the blue armor that they wore during their holy jihad against the humans. I often found myself saying that I was fighting the Covenant and not the Banished, only to quickly correct myself. While in the story the Banished separate themselves well from the Covenant, and in a lot of the gameplay the Banished will show themselves to be different from the Covenant when a Brute rushes you down with a Bulldog, but it's hard to compete with how solid colors read in my brain after 15 years of associating blue-armored aliens with the Covenant. Even if the story separates them well, color coordination is a bitch. The story of Halo Infinite is kind of a mixed bag for me. While thoroughly enjoyable to play and the actual plot of the game is interesting, it doesn't really end up going anywhere, which leaves me wanting more and disappointed currently. I'm not going to go through the entire story, as that really isn't fully necessary, but the primary plot mostly revolves around Master Chief and his new blue waifu, the Weapon, going through character development, which is great, and I loved that. But when the plot mentions things that are more important to the actual galactic conflict, it ends up being more setup than payoff. I mean, here's a rundown of essentially every plot point. The Banished are doing a thing.
What is it?
This, but I'm not sure why.
Probably bad. Let's stop them.
SMH. Can't have shit on Zeta Halo.
The main problem I have with the secondary plot, that of the galactic conflict, comes from the villains and their motivations. Escharum, the leader of the Banished, is a captivating villain. He's cool, and every time you hear a speech of his or see a cutscene focused on him, you are glued to the screen by his pure presence and performance. He starts focusing on his goals, but as time goes on he becomes fixated on the Master Chief and becomes obsessed with their shared legend. He loses track of the Banished goals and makes many weak decisions just to have Master Chief entertain him. He is old and scarred and weaker than he once was, hoping to die in combat before his age can get to him. He becomes feverishly excited to meet and overcome, or even die at the hands of a worthy foe, the legendary savior of humanity, John Halo. He's a truly engaging and fascinatingly flawed villain. But his goal, rebuilding the ring in order to give the Banished a home, a weapon, and a fortress, is kinda lacking. A Halo ring can't be fired without killing all sentient life, his Banished included, within multiple light years around it, so it isn't a very good weapon to have. Also, their hatred of humanity is pretty much misplaced. They simply want rid of human control over the galaxy, but since Cortana went rogue, humanity has been once again a fleeting race on the run trying to survive. They control nothing and are no threat to the Banished, as is evidenced by the entire UNSC fleet being reduced to ring world set dressing before the game even starts. The secondary antagonist, The Harbinger is literally a million questions with few answers. What are the Endless? Why are they in prison? Why is it bad that they come back? What is her problem with humanity? Why does she have a Reclaimer symbol on her head? What lies of the Forerunner is she the Harbinger of truth? How could the Endless possibly be worse than the Flood? The Harbinger is definitely set up for either the next Halo game or story DLC for Infinite, which is fine, but it leaves me unsatisfied after grinding to beat her dumbass boss battle. My least favorite gameplay element in the campaign are, unfortunately, the boss battles. While I usually love boss battles in video games, and the first two were actually quite fun, the later boss battles, especially on Legendary, were not fun in any regard, which is very important. You want your game to be fun. The elite boss battles are somewhat mechanically interesting. They use cloaking to keep you on your toes and are fairly easy to kill in a straight out and out fight because they have lower health, so they use their cloaks and speed to prolong the fight. The brute boss battles, however, are not interesting, and all the bosses will insta-kill you. It's not true difficulty, it's bullshit. Getting killed instantaneously with little time to react is not a challenge, it's really just annoying and leads to many tries in order to flawless the boss battle. Bosses should be tanky only insofar as to have the fight last a while you fight the interesting and unique mechanics that the boss has to offer. The bosses in Infinite, the brutes in particular, are mostly just bullet spongy regular enemies that will insta-kill you if you make one mistake, and in some cases, even if you don't make a mistake. The final boss is so entirely not fun, since I kept getting insta-killed, that I genuinely lost all interest in the campaign. If the Harbinger hadn't been the final thing in the game, I am unsure if I would have continued playing immediately. I probably would have taken a break. It's such a shame that the boss battles required me to cheese on Legendary instead of being difficult and engaging fights like you find in the open world. I'm so mad! I'm taking a break. Speaking of the open world, the tasks you have to complete aren't exactly varied, but it's made up for by the excellent combat loop. There are really only 4 things to do in the open world: rescue some Marines, decommission enemy outposts, secure fobs, and kill HVTs, high-value targets. Also collectibles, but that's not like gameplay really. The combat loop, as I mentioned earlier, makes all these pretty fun to complete, in particular the outposts, which are large bandage structures with multiple objectives inside you have to complete in order to shut them down. And the high-value targets, which are mini-bosses you can find in the world, who each hold a unique weapon that you can collect after beating them, are really fun to do, and they keep the combat fresh and unique because they have a unique weapon. The least interesting thing is probably clearing the fobs. They're small platforms that are all the same layout, with only a few enemies on them, but these are fine by my point, because they're fast travel points for you to gather arms and vehicles before moving on to something more interesting like the outposts. They give you a sense of control over the ring too, which is cool and thematic, but it isn't exactly challenging or engaging to actually take the fob itself. The final problem with the open world is kind of a personal gripe. It's not something that's an actual flaw. It can also be rectified in future story DLC. It's the environment. The entire map is one homogeneous biome of pine trees. I was gonna say palm trees, pine trees. While pretty, something that the level-to-level stories of previous Halos had the benefit of was hopping through many different environments to keep things fresh. Just to name a few, in Halo 3, you begin in the jungle, move on to the more urban ruins of New Mombasa, and then onto the Ark, which has deserts, snow, forests, and a parasite-riddled High Charity. Having new environments to roam through keeps things fresh and engaging, and as an open-world game, Infinite, with a world that isn't nearly as large as things like Red Dead 2, can't fit more than one biome in its world, which eventually leads to, by the end of your playthrough, you won't even acknowledge the vistas you were spending time taking in when you were starting. Overall, the Halo Infinite single player is fun and engaging, with only a few hiccups that will likely leave you wanting more, but will have you glued to the screen through an amazing combat loop and awesome new characters. I didn't mention Echo 216, as he doesn't really do much, and is generally just the more human voice of the game to show that what it would be like to not be a mean green alien killing machine, as Chief is a supremely confident, mostly machine man who doesn't afraid of anything. But he is well written, and you become attached to him as a father does a child, since he is so weak and scared, and you are not. In the end, the open world, the combat loop, the story, and the characters lead this game directly into being the best Halo campaign since Reach. The Legendary difficulty is a genuine challenge and is highly engaging, as long as you don't mind the frustratingly stupid one-hit kill boss battles. I rate Halo Infinite's campaign a 9 out of 10, and I wish I could give it the 10 that it felt like during its peak hours. But the unfulfilling ending, which leaves many questions unanswered and in fact poses a few new ones, alongside the terrible boss battles, brings the score down to a 9. If there is a story DLC that finishes the plot and has more engaging, less cheesy boss battles, this could be one of the best Halo plots since the Covenant trilogy. Which is, kind of a given. Well, this has been my review of Halo Infinite single player. I hope you enjoyed it, and I do recommend that you give it a purchase if you enjoy single player campaigns, as it is well worth the $60 they ask of you just for the single player. Even with a free multiplayer, Halo simply isn't Halo without Master Chief. Da 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 da. My friend. Meet my friend. Do you like him?
Spartans on point.
Go!